Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming back for the last session of the first day of our conference. It has been a great conference so far, some really interesting discussions, some confronting papers, and 3 very interesting papers this afternoon. Before I get started, I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. If there are any speakers for tomorrow, can you please make sure that your USB sticks, your presentations, get handed into the registration desk before 9 o'clock so that we can get it all set up for you. And also a reminder that there are drinks today after this session. So the first speakers this afternoon are Charlotte Bell and Lorelei Hine from ANROWS, and they are talking about the ANROWS Evidence Portal, identifying evidence gaps in interventions for violence against women. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lorelei Hine. I'll be doing the first half of the presentation today, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Charlotte Bell, who'll do the second half. So we're from Australia's National Research Organisation for Women's Safety, and we'll be telling you about the ANROWS Evidence Portal today, which is the project that we've been working on over the course of the last year and a half. So today I will be talking you through the background and methodology of the Evidence Portal, how it works. We'll be talking about the ways that the Evidence Portal could support your work, and then we will be talking through some preliminary findings on criminal justice interventions. First of all, the Evidence Portal is funded by the Australian Government Department of Social Services. We're also overseen by 2 important committees. We have an advisory group, mostly made up of subject matter experts in the violence against women sector, and also expert methodologists. And we're also overseen by a policy reference group with representation from all the states and territories, as well as the federal government as well. We've, throughout the life of this project, spoken to a lot of people with expertise in other Evidence Portal projects and other Evidence Toolkit projects throughout other countries, so acknowledge their support, and thank you to our project team and the other ANROWS staff that are involved. So I'll be talking a lot about evidence today, and the Evidence Portal. Obviously that's the name of the project, but we do just want to flag that while we use the term evidence to refer to the project, we don't capture all forms of evidence. We're not able to answer all research questions, but other forms of evidence and research are equally as valid for understanding what works within violence against women interventions, and how people experience those interventions. So what are evidence portals? What do we mean when we say evidence portal? Well, like I said before, we've consulted with colleagues from mostly the UK who have released evidence portals in various jurisdictions as well, so we're not the first, it's not a new concept. Broadly, they seek to consolidate information about what interventions might work so that policy, practice and or research stakeholders can get a sense of what intervention evaluation research exists, where are the gaps, do evaluations show whether an intervention works, and what should be considered during local implementation of these interventions. So evidence portals consolidate the information to answer these questions. They are mostly usually concerned with evaluations of interventions. So I've just got the definitions that we use for this project here. So by evaluation, we mean using social research methods to systematically investigate the effectiveness of social intervention programs. And by intervention, we mean any program, policy, strategy, tool, campaign, directive, or other activity designed to produce change or address a problem. So the definition of interventions or strategies to address violence against women for the project is very broad. So why do we need an evidence portal? We're, as I said, not the first evidence portal, but we are the first evidence portal specifically within the violence against women sector, so that's a pretty good reason to have one. But we've also identified a need for a tool that consolidates information into one place, provides an interactive way to visualise the evidence and the gaps in evidence, provides a framework to understand and explore interventions and their outcomes, is written in plain and accessible language, but takes into account potential biases in the research, and can be a component in understanding what interventions are effective, might be worth funding, implementing, researching, and so on. So this is just a bit of a visual example. I did a Google Scholar search for men's behaviour change programs, and I got over 108,000 results. So if you were trying to find out what works with regard to these projects, you'll be there for a while sifting through those results. And that's just on one program too. So the Evidence Portal aims to give you a place where you can go. You don't have to sift through 100,000 results, and you can find information on men's behaviour change programs easily. The other thing here is that not everyone necessarily uses that term or that phrase. So we search the literature for lots of different terms of similar programs to get a comprehensive understanding of what might work for those particular programs. So the word cloud is some of the search terms that we use to build the evidence portal. It's not all of them, but it just shows you the vast language that's used within the literature. So we are searching that and searching a range of terms and bringing it all together in one place so you don't have to plug in a million different searches into Google Scholar to kind of get the results that you're after. Some papers, as we know, are written in technical language or use a lot of jargon, and many different words and terms are used to describe violence against women concepts. So the Evidence Portal is trying to create a sort of a one-stop shop where you can come to. We've used plain language to get rid of the barriers with the technical jargon, and we've searched a wide range of sources. So the ANROWS Evidence Portal, basically it's a website. It's due for public release, expected to be the 8th of September this year, so very close. This is a bit of a sneak peek before the official release. So it's a website that hosts evidence and gap maps. These provide a big picture visual overview of interventions. They use a pre-specified framework. They can tell you where the evidence is, where there might be gaps, and Charlotte will be showing you some screenshots of those soon. We also have an intervention finder so that you can search for and filter for interventions in the field, read a bit more about them in the intervention reviews. So these follow a comprehensive predetermined format, provide a standardised assessment of the available interventions. We've designed them so that they're written in accessible language, they're easy to read and understand. We also have developed some bespoke research tools to go along with this project. I won't be talking much about them today, but we have a risk of bias tool that we've designed, and we also have a tool that we're using to estimate the effectiveness of interventions. So this is just a quick visual of the overview, the aims and the ultimate outcome of the Evidence Portal. The ultimate aim is to determine what we know about evaluations of interventions that aim to address and end violence against women. We use a systematic review methodology for our evidence search and synthesis in order to compile our data, with the result and then the main outcome being that it will aid policymakers, practitioners and researchers to have a collective understanding of the what works and to examine whether these interventions are effective. So like I said, we use a systematic review methodology. This we do because it's scientifically rigorous and replicable. It follows a series of planned steps, takes into account all possible literature that might be relevant for the research question, so that we can be confident that we have scoped and found as many evaluations to add to the evidence base that we can. It minimises bias and increases transparency with what we're doing. It provides explicit guidance to us as the research team about how to manage and synthesise the large research base, and it allows us to then easily group interventions that are similar together. We've searched 37 academic databases and over 50 grey literature sources, so bringing all of those together is a massive body of evidence. So it's a way to help guide how we interpret and organise it. This is our methodology and project structure. So like I said before, we've got our advisory groups that have helped along the way. We've done a scoping search, and we've used that literature from the scoping search to frame the systematic review. We do all the activities in the little bubbles in the funnel, and we narrow down the available evidence base until we have the studies that meet our criteria at the end, which results in the evidence portal at the bottom there. This is our inclusion criteria. I can't see it on the screen there, so I'm going to look over here. If we start at 12 o'clock at the top there and work around clockwise, the evidence portal includes interventions that explicitly aim to address violence against women. We include intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, child-to-parent violence, such as adolescent family violence, and we also include extended family violence, such as forced marriages. We also include child experiences of parental IPV as well. The next one there, we have the interventions must be designed for victims and survivors, perpetrators, general populations, or people at risk. So in terms of population, we're not putting much of a restriction on that. We include impact evaluations such as randomised control trials, quasi-experimental designs, single group evaluations, systematic reviews. We are including both the quantitative evaluation literature but also qualitative evaluations as well. We are not restricting very much on the outcomes that studies use, although we do exclude studies that look at outcomes around implementation or staff outcomes, such as whether a staff member feels more confident in their ability in their role. We don't place any limitation on who delivers the intervention, its frequency, its intensity, or its setting. And like I said before, the interventions can be any program, strategy, tool, campaign, directive, or other activity that's designed to produce change or address a problem. We include studies that have evaluated an intervention in Australia and other high-income countries. Our data spans from 1994 to the present day. The project is a living resource, and so we'll be doing regular updates to keep it populated with the newest research. And lastly, we include peer-reviewed research as well as the grey literature that I mentioned. So if a study meets all of those criteria, it's eligible for the evidence portal and it'll make it into our database. We organise the interventions across the 4 domains: prevention, early intervention, response, and recovery and healing. And you can see the definitions on the screen there. So we are including and organising the evidence across those. We have 4 evidence and gap maps that Charlotte will talk to in a minute, and they're aligned with each of these domains as well. So I'll hand over to Charlotte.
Thank you, Lorelei, and hello everyone. My name is Charlotte Bell, and I'd like to provide a brief overview of the evidence portal's key outputs, so namely the evidence and gap maps with a focus on criminal justice interventions, and finish with an overview of how you could use our intervention reviews to inform your work. So firstly, what is an evidence and gap map? Evidence and gap maps, or EGMs for short, offer a visual overview of the available evidence and are based on a systematic and transparent approach to identifying all relevant evidence on a certain topic. The EGMs are designed to meet the needs of policymakers, practitioners, and researchers. They provide a way to identify research gaps in the evidence base and promote a collective understanding of existing interventions in any given field. EGMs follow a pre-specified framework, which in our case was one that was developed closely with stakeholders and based on key documents like the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, as well as the literature across the field itself. As Lorelei mentioned, we've developed a series of 4 evidence and gap maps that are aligned to 4 key domains: prevention, early intervention, response, and recovery and healing. And we're really delighted to show you one of these today, the Response Evidence and Gap Map, which features a number of criminal justice interventions. So here we have just a static screenshot of one of our evidence and gap maps, and eventually they will be interactive and live, housed on the Evidence Portal website. As you can see, the evidence and gap map consists of 2 axes, the first being rows for the interventions within the response domain. So down the side you can see we've got a number of criminal justice related interventions, behavioural change programs, policing and legal support, and so on, and columns for the outcomes studied by each of the evaluations, such as gender-based violence outcomes, behavioural outcomes, health, wellbeing, emotions, parenting, and so on. We can also filter by outcomes themselves, for example, drilling down further into gender-based violence only, which would further bring up more granular level of detail if you're just particularly interested in intimate partner violence, sexual violence, or any of the other violence types that Lorelei has mentioned. The bubbles on the maps that intersect with each axis indicate the presence of existing evidence in a particular area. The size of the bubbles indicate the volume of evidence, with the larger bubbles meaning more available evidence, and the colours on the bubbles represent the type of study design. So we have green for randomised control trials, pink for quasi-experimental designs, purple for qualitative studies, and so on. On the other hand, the maps can also show us where gaps remain, indicated by the absence of any bubbles. We also have a series of filters along the top where you're able to drill down further into the evidence. For example, the intervention filter can tell us more about where, how, and by whom the intervention was implemented. And we can also see the characteristics of the target population that the intervention was delivered to via the publication filter. The study detail filter allows us to easily jump to Australia-specific evidence, among other features. And as you can see on the right-hand side, this map is currently showing a total of 97 studies. However, this reflects a subset of the full data set because we are still adding literature iteratively. So we expect this to grow significantly as we continue to follow the systematic process that Lorelei mentioned. Importantly, these EGMs are a living resource and will continue to be updated as more evidence becomes available. So what does all this mean and how can you use the EGMs to support your work? The EGMs offer access to a consolidated knowledge base of impact evaluations and systematic reviews. They can be used to identify gaps. And thus point to areas that the knowledge base may benefit from further research. They can support you in your work by showing where evidence is scarce or perhaps missing entirely, where only certain study designs exist, such as pre-post studies only, rather than stronger causal evidence from randomised control trials or meta-analyses, or where evidence does exist, but there appears to be a high risk of bias or less confidence in the author's findings. Beyond identifying gaps, they can also help us to more generally determine the nature of available evidence in the violence against women area. such as how the interventions are being delivered, and where there may be a proliferation of evidence on certain interventions or certain population groups. Ultimately, the evidence and gap maps are useful tools for strategically building the evidence base, can help to inform future knowledge production, research agendas, and support a strategic approach to policymaking. They can also support funding decisions to work to ensure available resources are spent efficiently. Here we have some preliminary findings related to criminal justice interventions. Criminal justice related interventions are captured across the continuum of prevention, early intervention, response, recovery and healing within the evidence portal. These interventions we've found are most commonly shown in the response domain. They tend to aim to improve both the safety of victims and survivors of violence against women, address their immediate needs, as well as respond appropriately to perpetrators of violence against women and reduce them from reoffending. We've currently catalogued over 90 studies on a range of criminal justice interventions and expect this number to grow significantly. Interventions have covered behavioural change programs, electronic monitoring for perpetrators, policing, legal responses, risk assessments, and restorative justice to date. Jump to the next one. So while our EGMs can show where available evidence exists, by nature they do not generally comment on the effectiveness of the interventions. Therefore, the next piece of the puzzle is our intervention reviews, which take this important next step. These are plain language summaries of individual interventions hosted on our website and only contain studies that have been deemed to show a low risk of bias, meaning we have more confidence in the author's findings. They each provide an overview of the intervention's key characteristics, such as the theory of change and whether the intervention has been implemented in Australia. The intervention reviews also include an effectiveness estimate, which is based on a standardised assessment developed in partnership with our key advisors. They estimate how effective the intervention is in changing outcomes, for example, reducing intimate partner violence, improving mental health, or other outcomes studied in the literature. I'll just whiz through. So, how could you use these reviews in your work? You can use the intervention reviews to assess the overall quality of an intervention. We apply our effectiveness estimate to each intervention, which provides a cohesive statement on whether the studies show that the intervention might work. But importantly, these intervention reviews also consider not just what works, but other equally important questions such as for whom and in what circumstances, by examining participant experiences of the intervention, the applicability of the intervention for certain populations, and considerations for implementing in Australia. So on that note, this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for listening. We welcome any questions that you might have. We've included our email addresses here if you have some at a later stage. Thanks.
Thanks, Lorelei and Charlotte. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Thank you, great presentation. I'm just wondering how long it took you to do this process. Like, what was the time frames to build such an amazing evidence base?
That's a great question. Yeah, look, it's the screening of the studies that we found through the systematic search is ongoing. We found over 500,000 studies that need to be screened. The project, I think maybe at this stage, has been about 12 months so far, and we'll continue as a living resource to build that. But yeah, it's a lot of work from our research assistants who've been doing a lot of the screening.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I'm actually really interested in this portal. My question is, I think we all know that a lot of government departments, bodies, perhaps organisations do evaluations of projects and programs that they run, which are not necessarily published. Have you considered how you would capture these types of interventions in your research, which you can't find them basically through a Google academic search?
At this stage, we're able to include what is published on organisations and departments' websites. So we do capture that grey literature. We did get a list of resources from someone that are not necessarily published, but we know the citation, we can screen them based on that. We don't have any plans to develop that, but that is a good place for the project to go after we've launched, in terms of getting hold of some of those evaluations that aren't publicly accessible.
So I know I've worked on a number of projects and they're not published evaluations. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could unpack a little more about the effectiveness of interventions that you, like the study that you've done on the effectiveness of the interventions.
Yeah, so what we do is when we do the intervention reviews, we apply the effectiveness tool, and it will give a measure of whether that intervention was effective per outcome, each different outcome. So whether it's maybe a measure of depression, there'll be an effectiveness estimate for that. Does the intervention work for depression? Does it work for anxiety? Does it work for PTSD? So it'll be able to give a really good understanding of what might work within different outcomes. So it can't tell you overall this intervention might work. It's dependent on the type of outcomes. Does that answer the question?
And you mentioned that you had someone else informing you in terms of how you developed that rating system.
Yes.
Can you unpack that a little bit more as well?
Yeah, we've worked with some academics, so someone from Queensland University of Technology and someone from Griffith University to inform that. Ideally, it would be great if we could do a meta-analysis across all of these outcomes. So this tool takes the studies that are low to medium risk of bias, and we do use p-values and use that as a measure of effectiveness. It's not as good as doing a meta-analysis, but it was the best that we could come up with that would work for this project.
Okay, I think we might do a push on because we did start a bit late, but we can have maybe, hopefully, if we will stay around afterwards for a drink and have more questions. So thank you very much. We look forward to the 8th of September when it goes live.